Welcome to Brewmaster. I'm Sarah, and I'm your host and Brewmaster. On this show, we find homebrewers and give them the opportunity to work with a professional. They get to learn some of the science behind brewing while I try to up their homebrew game. Today we're brewing with Andy and we're making a Hazy I.P.A, and later we're catching up with Mark from Great Canadian Hops Company for the tasting. This is Brewmaster. Welcome to Brewmaster. I'm your host, Sarah, and today we're here with Andy.
Hi.
Hi. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your history with brewing?
I've always been a fan of beer. Really was excited about the idea of doing it myself because there's so many different varieties that I like. Biggest issue for me is what to get, making sure I have the right equipment, how much money I have to spend, and also just, size of the space I would require. There was one time that I tried to, I was gonna like a brew your own experience, but I went to a brew your own shop, a facility.
Okay, yeah.
And I just found the person confusing. Like they were overwhelming by how many things they were suggesting, different things. And for someone who's new like myself, I needed,
a little more guidance.
Well, it's brewing for dummies, and it's one of those things. And it was very overwhelming. And I got, I bought books. I had all these things. I went home, and then I was just completely overwhelmed.
Right.
So I thought, you know what? It's just easier to drink beer, so I'm just going to buy someone else's for now to actually make the beer.
Yeah, for sure. So we're going to talk a little bit about equipment when we go over to actually brew.
Okay.
And we'll sort of go over the basic stuff that you would need to get going. I would say all in on a basic homebrew kit, you're looking at like $200. So it's not a big investment. And you'll be brewing about 20-liter batches.
Okay.
Basically just need enough space for a water cooler and your stovetop, and then maybe somewhere in a closet to throw a fermenter. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So you haven't actually brewed before.
I have not.
Have you ever tried to brew before, or is this
I have
just
not.
nothing at all?
This is complete virgin territory for me.
Fantastic. So what kind of beers do you like to drink?
My number one has always been IPAs.
Right.
I just find that other stuff is either too rich, too malty for me. I like the occasional lager and pilsner, but for me, IPAs are number one.
Right.
Yeah.
So you like that hot flavor, that bitterness?
I do. I like to refer to it as a punch in the taste buds. Main reason being is I like a flavor that lasts. I find with most beer, yes, they're clear, crisp, and refreshing. However, they fade. I like something that's, I would almost say, taste challenging.
Okay.
I just, when I discovered my first IPA, I was fascinated by how bitter it was.
Right.
Yet how delicious it was at the same time.
Right. Nice. That's awesome. So I know you don't have any homebrew samples to bring us to taste here. So what I thought is I'd pick up a commercial IPA option. We can give it a taste, see what you like, what you don't like, what you might do differently. And let's just give that guy a little taste here.
Excellent.
I mean, the aroma on that is fantastic.
It really is good.
You can definitely smell there's a lot of sort of tropical hops going on in there.
Yep. No, and that's number one thing that I do like is the tropical, but for me, it's also the bitterness. I think that's, for me, the perfect IPA for me would be the balance of dank, fruity, but also bitter.
Right,
I still like the piney's. I still like that kind of a taste through it. But yeah, no, that's a good beer. I like it. That's something I could see myself drinking a lot of.
Fair enough.
Yep.
So would you ramp up the bitterness? Or are you happy with the balance?
I would actually say I would probably go a little bit more bitter than that.
Okay.
The fruitiness is perfect. As you said, the smell, the aroma was amazing. But definitely the bitterness is what's missing for me.
Right. Fair enough. So let's talk a little bit about the ingredients we're going to use for your beer. Now, obviously, with an IPA, the malt is not the most important part, but I do still think it plays a really important role. So we're going with 2-row here for your base malt. I actually recommend most people to actually give it a little taste, see what you think. So the base malt is the part that's going to give you the majority of your extract, the majority of your sugars that will eventually turn into alcohol.
Okay.
So you can see it's kind of bready. Yeah. Oh. You can sort of the backbone of most beers.
Yeah, it tastes familiar.
Yeah, exactly. So the other really important one for me in an IPA in particular is oats. Basically just the exact same oats you would have for breakfast.
Oh, okay.
So it gives, first of all, some of that haze that you're seeing. It gives that body, because you can't get that much body from hops. You can get some proteins and all the flavors, but it's not going to give it that heft.
Yeah, so this gives it substance.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then the only other malt that we're adding is actually carafoam, which just flat out is giving you a nice head and some good body.
Okay.
Okay. So the stars of the show, of course, are going to be the hops.
Yay.
Yes. So we're going with 2 here. The first one is the African Queen. So this is a hop that has all of those dank, deep flavors,
Okay.
but also a whole bunch of tropical fruit flavors going on at the same time. And then we are going to be dry hopping it with Belma. So she's full on tropical fruit.
Okay.
So what I recommend if you want to, not you're gonna try to eat these because that's not gonna taste good. But if you smell hops, they just smell green, right? You don't really get much of anything from them. But if you put it between your hands, that just helps to release all the essential oils.
Okay.
And then give your hands a smell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so suddenly you don't get that green aroma
that's
anymore.
crazy.
You start to smell all of those tropical flavors coming
definitely
out.
it's coming through.
And a little bit of that sort of piney, dank aroma as well.
For sure. Yeah, no, it's amazing.
And then if you want to try that with the Belma, you'll just see slight differences there. And these are both also high in alpha acid, so they will provide a nice kick of bitterness to the beer as well. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that one just has all the sort of tropical fruits coming out.
Yeah, that's incredible. It really
Yeah.
is. It's amazing.
Which is why when you add it to the beer, like as soon as it hits the heat, you'll just get all of those aromas will be released.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, why don't we go and brew your first beer then?
That sounds awesome. Let's do it.
And it's basically going to become the consistency of like thick oatmeal. Welcome back to Homebrew Master. We're about to brew a Hazy IPA with first-time brewer Andy. Let's get started. So you've never brewed before.
I have not.
So we're going to show you basically the simplest way to start all grain brewing at home.
Okay. My name is Andrew Hicks. I've got very little brewing history, attempts, but no success. I've always wanted to brew my own beer just because I'd like to make and alter the flavors to my liking. Okay.
So first thing you need is a mash tun. Basically, it's a 20-liter water cooler.
Okay.
What the mash is the first step of brewing. It's where you steep the grains at a specific temperature for about an hour. And that's how you break down the starches in the grain into sugar, which becomes the food for the yeast that it turns into alcohol.
Best part.
Best part, absolutely. So we've got a 20-liter water cooler here. We've got what's called a bazooka screen inside. So you can see that's basically just gonna stop your grain from ending up in your final product.
Okay.
And then we just have a ball valve on the front for when we are gonna collect the liquid later on. Only other things you really need is a big pot. That's basically your kettle where you're gonna boil everything, add your hops, and a smaller pot for your strike water. So your strike water is basically just the water that you're using for your mash.
So today we're brewing an IPA. It's going to be a dank, juicy, tropical type of IPA. At least that's what I'm hoping turns out. I'm looking for something with a little bit more bitterness and a little less maltiness. I'm not a big fan of the malts. It adds a bit of a different sweetness to it, but I prefer bitter, clean, a little bit more robust, something that you kind of, you think you regret, but you actually keep going and you really enjoy.
So because you want an IPA, we want to dry it out. We don't want a whole lot of maltiness in there. We have it at about 67 degrees because we want your mash to be at about 64 degrees.
Okay.
So we're hoping to lose about 3, and then we've got some cold water over there that we can top up with if we need to.
Great.
Now the general range for a mash is between 64 and 67 degrees. 64 is going to give you a much more dry, lighter body in the end, whereas 67 is going to give you that rich malty sweetness. And then just for ease of cleaning, when I'm mashing, I like to use a big hop bag. This really has no huge impact on the brew. It just makes cleaning up easier, which is why I like to use them.
Makes good
sense. So we
sense.
basically just pop this in place and then we clamp it down so nothing moves while we're stirring. So now that we've sort of talked about what equipment you need, let's get mashed in.
Excellent.
So Andy wanted an IPA. I was aiming for about a 5.1% beer. Now the amount of grain you have dictates where your alcohol is going to end up because the grain turns into sugar in solution, which is then eaten by the yeast and becomes your alcohol. Because it's an IPA, you don't really want a lot of grain character in the final product, so we mashed at 64 degrees.
It's amazing how much she actually knows. And for someone like me, which is basically brewing for dummies, it was nice to have someone kind of holding your hand and guiding through it. And you can tell it comes to her second nature, and I'm hoping that eventually that'll be the same for me.
So I'm basically going to pour the grain. You're going to stir with the mash paddle.
Alrighty.
It's basically going to become the consistency of like thick oatmeal. So for his, we went with 3 kilograms of 2-row. Now that's just your base malt. That's going to give you the majority of your sugars. We used 1 kilogram of Munich, which is sort of a base malt, but it gives a little bit of color as well. And then 0.6 kilograms of flaked oats, which is going to give you a lot of the haze and some of the body that you find in the final product, and 0.5 kilogram of carafoam, which is just going to give you nice body and head retention.
The ingredients, from how Sarah described them to me, they were spot on for what I was looking for. As far as the tropical fruits and the bitterness, it seems like she's marrying the two the way I would like it.
So we've hit 64 degrees, just what we're looking for. So we're all mashed in. We can take these clamps off, put this lid on, and we're good for an hour.
Awesome. I am very excited to brew the beer today because of the fact that I get to witness one of my own ideas, or Sarah's idea of mine, to bring it to fruition.
Okay, so now we're gonna start sparging. So what the sparge is it's rinsing all of the sugars out of the grain.
All right.
It's also collecting some of your proteins, all your flavors, all your colors.
Okay.
And you want the temperature of this water to be particularly warm.
Okay.
Because you are stopping the enzymes from continuing to break down the starches.
Alrighty.
So it also helps because then your temperature at the end is significantly closer to boiling.
Okay.
And it just means that you have less time to wait for everything to come up to the boil. Okay. Which is when we get to add the hops, which is the part you're really looking forward
really
to.
excited for you.
Yeah, let's just give that a moment to drain a bit, and then we'll grab the pot and just dump it right on top.
Okay.
So the most important thing to think about is your total volume.
Yes.
You can get a fancy pot with demarcations and whatever.
Oh, okay.
Or you can measure out your volume and know where to stop.
Got it.
So on this pot, I know that 20 liters is basically right in between those two bolts.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah.
But you want to go a little bit higher because it boils for an hour, so you're going to have some evaporation.
Okay.
I think we're low enough now. You can just dump that right on top. Perfect.
I was always confused about the malt aspect, and it's amazing how clear and precise now I understand what malts are for and what they actually bring to it, and how I need to almost kind of steer clear of them more often than not to get the bitterness that I need.
Andy is great. He had never brewed before, but was really, really excited to get into it.
I couldn't be more excited.
So we've collected all of our wort now.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm just going to take this hose off because we don't need it anymore.
Okay.
And then if you don't mind, I'll just get you to put that right up on the burner. And there we are. We'll throw the lid on. So let's just wait for this to come up to a boil, and then we'll get the hops in.
Excellent.
All right. Okay, so now we're up to a boil. So first things first, you don't want your lid on.
Okay.
Okay, malt has this natural compound in it that kind of will condensate back down in and make it smell like canned corn, which no one wants in their beer.
Okay.
So now we're gonna set a timer for an hour, and we'll be back to add our hops.
Excellent.
So now we've had an hour of boiling.
Okay.
Okay, so first things first, we're just gonna turn off the propane tank.
Okay.
So now we have to cool it down. So I just have a piece of copper tube.
Okay.
Copper's a great conductor of heat.
Sure, yep.
So we're gonna run water through it, but it isn't sanitary yet. So we're gonna let it sit in the hot wort for about 5 minutes because the heat of that will completely sanitize this.
Okay.
We can also add in our hops now because might as well give them a little extra time.
Excellent.
So once we got to the boil, I didn't actually end up using a bittering hop for Andy because I was putting in 140 grams of African Queen for the aroma hop. Now, traditionally, you need the hops to be in for the whole duration of the boil to extract the alpha acids and give you some bitterness. But because the African Queen has such a high alpha acid count, and we were putting in so much more than you would in a typical or any other sort of style except for an IPA, that the amount of time that it sits in the hot liquid is long enough to extract some of that bitterness he was looking for. Now, heat is going to sanitize this, but everything on the cold side also needs to be sanitized.
Okay.
So I have rinsed that all with it's a no-rinse sanitizer, so we know that we don't have any bacteria or wild yeast growing in there.
Okay, perfect.
So hot side, you can always get away with heat, killing all your germs.
Okay.
Cold side, you definitely need to be using an actual sanitizer
Makes
on your
sense.
products.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll give this 5 minutes and then we're good to go.
Excellent.
So now everything's been sitting for about 5 minutes.
Yep.
This is nice and sanitized. Our hops have started releasing their flavor. So we're just gonna get some water running through this. So can I get some water, please? So as you can see, the water is going in the coil this way, right?
Okay, and that's so it's cooling down.
That is cooling down.
Okay.
But to make it go faster, you're gonna grab that spoon,
Okay.
and I'm gonna get you to stir the opposite direction of the coil.
Okay.
So that just helps to speed up the process.
Got it, okay.
So the temperature that you cool down to depends greatly on the type of yeast that you're using.
Okay.
So if you were using a sort of standard American ale yeast, you'd be looking to go down to about 20 degrees.
Okay.
Now we're using a Kvike, so we only actually have to drop it down to 34 to 40 degrees.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so it'll go a lot faster that way.
It smells amazing.
And actually now we're already down underneath 40, so we can cut that water. And we can just take the copper coil out and place it right in front. It's done its job. So now we're actually gonna go into our fermenter.
Okay.
So like I said, all of this stuff has been sanitized, so I'm just going to put this in another sanitized vessel.
Okay.
We're gonna get colander and a big funnel.
Okay.
I'm gonna get you to grab that pot. We can pour it fairly quickly at first. And then as we get more and more hops in the strainer, we'll just need to slow it down a little bit. So I'll let you know. Perfect. So for the yeast for Andy's beer, we went with the Ep.2 Kvike. Now, it's a Norwegian yeast, has been used for years and years in Norway, relatively new to North America. What I really like about it as a brewer is that unlike your traditional lager or ale yeast, you can ferment at a much higher temperature. So we actually pitch these at 35 degrees Celsius, which also speeds up the fermentation process. So you can move through the fermentations a lot faster. So now all we have to do is pop this back in, and we're good to take this inside and pitch our yeast.
Great.
Ep.2 gives you a nice clean fermentation, but it also does add some flavors, and the Ep.2 Kvike specifically adds mango and guava, which I thought would really help to sort of boost those flavors that we were getting out of the hops for the IPA. And then once the beer was fully fermented, we actually added more hops. It's called a dry hop, when you add it either during fermentation or post-fermentation. For that, we used 84 grams of Belma, which adds to the orange and sort of tropical notes that we got from the African Queen. And finally, let's give her a taste.
Okay.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Homebrewer Andy's Hazy IPA is finished fermenting, aging, and carbonating. Let's give this beer a taste. Welcome back to Homebrew Master. All of our beers are finished and we're ready for everyone's favorite part, the tasting. Today we've got a guest taster, Mark Whitmore, here with us from the Great Canadian Hops Company, and you're going to be tasting Andy's beer. Andy's our home brewer, and we brewed an IPA for this one. So Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about your hop yard?
Yeah, so the Great Canadian Hops Company is a small family farm down by Turkey Point, Ontario. And we're actually well situated for home brewers because we have 35 varieties and lots of different things for people to try out.
Nice.
Lots of small quantities, but something unique for everybody to experiment with. I'd say the one unique thing we have is that we have 3 of our own hops. So these are wild hops that we have found around Norfolk County.
That's fantastic.
So one that was found down by Turkey Point, one that was found just a little bit more on Front Road, and then just this year we found a new one on our farm itself. So here I had owned the farm for a bunch of years. I'm walking around, I was like, oh, what's this? And so there's a hop. So it's all in the yard.
And how long has the Great Canadian Hops Company been around?
Yeah, we started in 2015. We put our poles up and we put a few plants in August, which turns out to have been a huge mistake. You should have planted them in April and not in August. So those plants survived, luckily. But it was really more 2016 when the yard started to grow. So now we're up to 2.5 acres.
So you brought some of your hops with you today.
Yeah.
What are we looking at here?
So we're looking at Glacier today, and this is a vine that we didn't harvest this year. I picked it out of the yard this morning, but you can see, you know, sort of, it's just a tangled mosh pit.
Yeah.
Of, you can see that this is the coconut core, they call it, C-O-I-R, and that's what you string up. and then the vine or the bind kind of grows up it in a clockwise fashion all the way up, and then the cones kind of come out at the top. So when you go to harvest it, what you do is you cut it at the bottom, and you cut it at the top, and you got this 18-foot string of mess that you put through your processor, and it strips all the cones and the leaves off, and eventually you just end up with the cones.
Right.
And that's what you want in the end, is the cones.
And then in the very end, you end up with your pelletized hops, right?
Well, in fact, you really don't want the cone. What you really want is the lupulin inside, right? The cone is just a vessel to get it, and the pellets have lupulin in it, but it's also got the other stuff along the way. But yeah, in the end, this is what 99% of the brewers want. Yeah.
All right, well, that's awesome. Why don't we get to tasting this beer?
Good, looking forward to it.
So normally when I'm doing a tasting, I do like to look at the color first and the appearance. So we were talking about trying to get it a little bit darker, but I am really happy with the haze on that.
Yeah, no, that's a great haze for sure.
Yeah, and yeah, even in I can't really find any sunlight right now, but you get a little bit of that orange coming through.
Yeah,
to find the right light.
No, absolutely.
That's fantastic.
And it's got that amazing rocky head that you get with the IPAs that just wants to live there on top of your glass. So now let's check out the aroma.
Oh, wow.
Wow, that's fantastic.
I think I just snorted something. I got too excited. I went in. I went right in. It was magical. It smells good.
I mean, you can't say it smells like anything other than hops, right?
No,
Like,
no.
that is, I'm not getting any malt in there.
No, fantastic. That's exactly what I was hoping for.
And finally, let's give her a taste.
Okay.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Boy, that's good.
That's nice. Incredibly crisp. Mm-hmm. That's really clean.
Yeah. Part of that is from the yeast that we picked,
Okay.
and doing the really, really low mash temperature. So all of your sugars are as simple as possible.
Okay.
So that the yeast has the ability to eat them all, right? If you have a higher mash temperature, you end up with these complex sugars that the yeast can't eat. And that's how you end up with that sort of sweet background.
Right.
Which for me, for an IPA, that's not what we want, right? We want that nice, clean canvas to just showcase those hops.
Okay. Yeah, no, and that's, to be honest, I'm curious. Do we know what the alcohol content is?
It's 5%.
Okay. Because I was going to say it tasted a little bit lighter to me, like in the fact that it reminds me a lot of a session IPA, because it's very drinkable. That's what scares me. It's very drinkable. But no, I mean, it's very crisp. I really like it. It's very light.
Well, that's the nice thing about like a 5% IPA. Like you see a lot of IPAs that are 6. I've got one in the fridge that's 10, and you can only drink like one.
Yeah.
And that's it. Whereas like a 5, you can have a couple. And
Exactly. There's something that, and that's, I can definitely tell you we could drink a lot of these.
Yeah.
Right.
So is there anything you would want to change about it? I know it doesn't have quite that bitterness that you were talking about.
I think that's the only thing. For me, as far as the taste is concerned, it's great. It's exactly what I'm looking for. It is very hop forward, which I like. The only thing, as I said to you in their interview, was the fact that I want something that's a little bit taste challenging. And the only reason that is because I've been drinking so many IPAs from so many different places. A lot of them are starting to taste the same. So it's always looking for that one unique feature. And for me, I like to go a little bit stronger. So it's one of those things, just a little bit more of a piney, I guess, kick, a little bit more of that bitterness. Other than that, I mean, this is fantastic.
So if you wanted to recreate this recipe at home, but bump up that bitterness to give you that flavor you wanted, remember we were talking about the day we brewed it, I didn't put any bittering hops in.
That's right.
We just relied on the bitterness coming out in the whirlpool.
Yes.
So if you put that addition in at the beginning, and you could start fairly low and sort of work your way up, and then find where you really like that to live.
Perfect.
And that's really the only thing I would do differently.
That's amazing. That's really simple. That's great.
Very simple. And for that hop, you're not looking for the juicy, big flavorful hops, because it's in there for the whole boil. All those flavors are going to dissipate. So you're looking for something like, I don't know, if you have Zeus or Warrior or something like that.
We have Zeus, for
just
sure.
some big alpha acids. Get that bitterness in there. Get those earthy flavors in there. And then get all of your aromas and your juiciness from that last addition and any dry hopping that you do.
That's amazing. Perfect.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for being here. Really glad you enjoyed the beer. Thank you so much for bringing these hops.
My pleasure.
It's been a great day.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
This has changed everything for me. I never thought home brewing was as simple as it is. And for me, it's given me hope that I can actually start to experiment and make some beers that I truly, honed into my tastes, my flavors. Been a great experience. Awesome.